Hello everyone, I'm going to be building a PC today, and while I build it, I'll record it and show you how it goes. Before we begin, we're going to need a few things, such as tools. For today's build, I've chosen 2 small Phillips head screwdrivers and 1 large Phillips head screwdriver. You're going to need your screws that came along with your parts, which I've kept in a bowl for easy storage, and you're going to need your parts. And also, you're going to need a static wrist strap, or I would prefer to have a static wrist strap, as it prevents the parts from getting static electricity from your body and frying them out, which is not what we want after you've spent money on your precious PC parts. To ground yourself, all you have to do is your static wrist strap, put the metal part inwards, touching your skin, and then wrap it around your wrist. And simply after that, to ground yourself, just hook the alligator clip on the other side to any unpainted piece of metal. Let's begin! Okay, for our first and easiest step, we're going to be doing the RAM installation. To install the RAM, all you have to do is look for the little notch on the pins of your RAM and look for the little bump in the middle of your RAM slots. Your RAM slots will usually be the longest slots with the clips on your motherboard. The other slots are for other things, so you don't have to worry about them right now. So simply look for where it lines up. Flip open the clip. Some will have clips on 2 sides, some will have clips on 1 side. This only has one side clip. Basically push them in evenly and press firmly until you hear a click from this side. Watch. You heard the click, and that means the RAM's installed. Just make sure your pins are aligned before you press firmly because you're going to destroy it. So just flip open another clip. Do the same thing with the other. And press inside. Before you do anything else, just make sure you plug the RAM into the right slots. So this motherboard, which is the ASRock B250M HDV, this one only has 2 RAM slots, but some will have 4 slots. And pretty much what you're gonna want to do if you have 4 slots, they're usually color coded. Do the 2 away from the two it's the same color coded slots farthest away from the CPU. So sometimes they'll be black and gray, or depending on what motherboard you have. But the 2 color coded slots that are furthest away from your CPU, which is what you're gonna want to do if you don't have 2 slots only. Because this only has 2 slots, we're gonna install 2 slots. We've installed our DDR4 RAM, and now let's move on to the next step. Okay, for our next step, we're going to install our CPU, our central processing unit. For this build, we've gone with the i3 7th gen, and it goes in this slot, which is the LGA 1151. And the gray stuff on here is thermal paste, which came on from our CPU cooler, which goes to CPU. This is from a previous take, and because we already installed it, can't just wipe it off. And pretty much it doesn't matter though. So either your CPU will come with a cooler that has thermal paste pre-installed onto this little copper plate here, in a pattern, not in this circle thing. That's just how it goes after it makes contact. Or they'll give you a little syringe with thermal paste, and pretty much you can just spread thermal paste on top of this little gray part. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do a pattern. They just do it in a pattern to make it easier. But now let's get on to installing the CPU. Before you install the CPU, you have to make sure you're installing it the right way. On a CPU, in every corner, there's either a dot or a triangle. 3 of them will have dots, only one of them will have a triangle. This triangle is what matters. So pretty much, on your motherboard, first of all, take this black socket off. You're gonna need that. You won't need that, but you might want to save it because you're gonna need that if you ever decide to take your CPU out or maybe return it, because the manufacturers will ask for this back. So pretty much all you have to do is, you remember the triangle, right? Open the slot with a little push down and a slide out, and it'll come out. Flip it back, and now look. Usually in the corner there will be a little triangle over there. As you can see here on the motherboard, it's right here. You can look in all the corners and line up the triangle on the CPU with the triangle on the motherboard, and simply, oops, I messed it up. Simply drop it in. Be careful not to bend the. If you saw what I did, be careful not to drop it like irregularly and drag it, because that will bend the pins, making it so that the CPU will be dysfunctional. Pretty much just make sure it's seated in there. Do a little wiggle. All you have to do is, after doing that, you pull this tab back to make sure it goes under the screw, and you push it down. This will take a bit more force than you think it would, but that means it's seated properly. Congratulations, now you have your CPU installed. Now I'm going to put the cooler on because the CPU gets kind of hot. So this one came with a pre-installed fan and a heatsink. Heatsink pretty much is just a bunch of metal which radiates the heat outward. For this one, there's 4 holes here, and there's a bunch of spikes on the bottom of our CPU cooler. And pretty much you just line up the spikes with the holes in the motherboard and push down. And that's it. We've installed a CPU cooler. This is a cable we'll plug in later. Don't worry about it now. Hello everyone. For our final step, we're going to be installing our SSD. Solid state drive. We've gone to Acer FA100 for this one. 256 gigabytes. Pretty cheap, but pretty fast. On the back, there will usually be a sticker for that hides a thermal pad. We've taken the sticker off here in the previous take. And this is the black thermal pad. Try not to touch it too much. This is pretty much what dissipates heat nicely on the SSD and also prevents any extra electrical motherboard contact. So to put in your SSD, look for a slot that says Ultra M.2 in some way. You don't have to say Ultra 1. This one just says Ultra M.2. It's pretty small usually, and usually it matches up with the little notches on the SSD. But stick it in, put it in a slight angle, and push it down. You can see it's springy. It's at an angle. And push it down until it hits that standoff. And usually a screw will come with it in your SSD package. So line that screw up. I dropped it. I'm gonna pick it up one sec. Okay. Push it in. Line that screw up. And screw it in. Simply just screw it in. Just don't make it too tight. Just make sure like it's in there so it won't slip out. Don't make it too tight. That might damage your SSD. And that's pretty much it. You've installed your SSD. Make sure the thermal pad is facing downwards. You can only put the SSD in one way anyway, so probably shouldn't be that hard. And that's pretty much it. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next and hardest step, wiring. You've reached the final step, which is wiring. Congratulations for making this far in your first PC build. Because you made it so far, let's start to ruin on the last step and make sure you're wearing your static wrist strap. So let's continue. The wiring can either be the most complicated or the easiest depending on how you build your PC. For our first part, we're going to take this little wire hanging off our CPU fan. Look for a little port near the CPU fan that says CPU fan. It's usually silk screened onto the motherboard. Look for the little notch in the connector and plug it in. It lines up. You can only put it in one way, so you don't have to worry about putting it in the wrong way. Congratulations, that's the easiest part of your wiring done. Our next part, we're going to have to use this big brick called our power supply, or PSU, power supply unit. We've gone with the Aries Game 500 volt for this one. Watt, sorry, not volt. And this is the front side. It has a hole for the cable and a little switch. This is the power switch. So pretty much this is a non-modular power supply, which basically means all the cables are stuck into the back. A fully modular power supply means all the cables you can plug in and plug out what you don't need. A semi-modular one is only half of them you can plug out and plug in. And this one, non-modular, you can't plug in anything. This is pre-installed and you're stuck with this stuff. So if you don't like some of the cables, you don't using them, you're stuck with it. They're not coming out. It's extra cabling you have to deal with. This is non-modular. So you can see we have all our cables. So now let's plug everything in. The first step, we are going to be plugging it into this ginormous connector. This is the motherboard power. This is 24 pins. It's called ATX Power 1, if that helps. Look for the biggest connector on your power supply. It's also 24 pin. It's really hard to miss. It's the biggest one there. And pretty much line it up. There's a clip on the connector and there's a clip on this. Line it up and now push it in. This usually takes a lot of force. But all you have to do is push it in and make it so the crack isn't that big anymore, so it's connected. And make sure that this little clip is all on the way. It's not sitting halfway. That's one side, and that's the other. Now that's the hardest part done of this wiring because that takes a lot of force. Don't bend the pins on the bottom of your motherboard because that will damage something. So don't put way too much force on it to build on a flat surface. And that's pretty much it for the first part. Now for the second part, there's the second source of power. This is your CPU power slot. Your CPU draws power separate from the rest of the motherboard because it's your central processing unit, the brain. It takes extra power, so the power supply has a whole special cable for it. Pretty much, you can look for on your power supply either 2 separate 4s, such as this, or they'll be combined into an 8. Most power supplies, you can just combine them quite simply by literally just pulling them together and sliding them into each other. This is how ours work. Or you could pull it apart. They'll snap apart. So you slide them into each other. They'll become an 8. Slide them out. You have 2 4s. You only need 1 4. Looking at this computer, this connector is pretty small. It's 4 pins. So all you have to do is take your 4 pin. This one's slightly easier. Line it up with the clip or this thing and slide it in. This one isn't as hard to plug in as the 24 one. It's not plugging in. And there it is. I plugged it in after a little bit of force. That's fine. Don't use too much force. And that's literally all the cables you're gonna need for a starter for a bench setup as simple as this. And that's almost all of it. There's one more part to this video. So after you've wired everything, just make sure if you're using an HDD, you're gonna have to plug in these things called SATA cables, SATA, or some people refer to them as SATA. I pronounce them as SATA. They look like this on the motherboard. This is a SATA cable. There's a little L shape, as you can see there. But we're not using HDD, so we're not gonna need that. And if you're using a graphics card or a GPU, it depends if you have a newer or an older one. This is the slot for graphics card. You can tell because the clip is like an arrowhead. That's fine. So for your GPU, you're gonna look for either an 8-pin. It depends what kind of slot your GPU has. But we don't have one, so we're not gonna use that. And we don't have any hard drives or anything else. We're not gonna use the SATA ones. So you can ignore the rest of them. Congratulations, you've done the most annoying part. All right, for the last step, we're gonna turn your PC on. Simply find this cable, the cable that looks like this, that came with your power supply. If you didn't, just find one that looks like this. Some people have one lying around. If it didn't come with your PSU, you should go complain to them actually, because they should give you one. Plug it in. There, done. Now, flip the switch. Oh no, nothing's working. That's how it's supposed to be actually. So pretty much what you're gonna want to do, flip the power switch back off for the first thing. So the reason it isn't working is because we've only built our PC in this environment. It's still an open circuit. It's not a closed circuit yet. What you're gonna have to do is, if you built this in a case, it'll have a power button. But if you didn't build in a case like we did, it won't have a power button. So there's no quote-unquote button to turn it on. Just turning the power supply on makes the power available, but it doesn't start the PC. So what you're gonna want to do is, some motherboards will come with this little switch. It's a little button switch. If you don't have one, you can do this with a screwdriver, but we're gonna show you the way with the button. So pretty much, you're gonna first find a little, it's usually at the corner, something that says panel 1. That says panel 1. This is your panel header. And what you're gonna want to do, you might want to consult your motherboard manual for this one because it's slightly more complicated. But pretty much, take your little switch thing, and after consulting your motherboard, look at your power switch. It's labeled power SW for power switch. On the back, there is a little arrow, as you can see right there. That's your positive. The positive one is gonna go in on one. It matters which one is positive, which one is negative. Otherwise, it won't turn on. It won't short your PC. Don't worry, but it won't turn on otherwise. So after checking your motherboard manual, which one is ground and which one says PWRBTN, which means power button. For example, it says here, but that's not very clear. So you're gonna want to check your motherboard's manual, which you can usually find online. After you find out which one's positive, which one's negative, the one with the arrow is positive. The one without the arrow is negative. So for our motherboard, also every power will have a non-existent pin in the corner to help signify which one is which. So the one right next to it for us is ground, which is our negative. The one the other side one is the power button one. So the ground is negative and the power button one is positive. So what you're gonna want to do, line up the positives and the negatives, and plug your switch in. There it is. It's plugged in. And now, all you have to do, power your power supply back on, and press the button. Oh no. Oh, there it is. Took a second. I think it's because the cable got caught. So pressing this button is equivalent to pressing your, oh my god, power button. So pretty much that's all you want to do. Now we're going to show you how to do it without a screwdriver. So pretty much to safely stop this, press the power thing again. Oh, oops, I forgot it doesn't do that. No, it does. See, look, it stopped. Also, your power supply fan will start spinning once it turns on. It's just stopped because we turned it off. Now, when you go work with this again, turn the power off. Flip the power switch on the back of your power supply off. Take this out. And now, grab a screwdriver. and maybe if you want to feel safe, some gloves. So pretty much, turn the power supply back on. Because the tip of the screwdriver is metal, right? You're gonna want to touch those two pins, the same two pins we touched, at the exact same time. This is called quote unquote shorting the motherboard or jumping it. So pretty much after touching, it's the same thing as the power supply. It closes the circuit and it turns the PC on again. Congratulations, your PC is now built. Congratulations, you've built and turned on your first PC. You should be proud of yourself. For this build, we will not be installing it in a case. This build was just for the purpose of telling you how to install all the parts. To install it in a case, it's pretty simple. Find the holes in your case and find the holes in your motherboard and screw them in. But for this build, all we did was build it and turn it on. After this point, what you're going to want to do is get a monitor and get maybe whatever port the back of your motherboard has. For us, it's HDMI. And plug in your HDMI and get a monitor and power your monitor and plug in the HDMI and see if it boots. It probably won't have an OS installed on it, so you're gonna have to go install an OS, but we're not gonna show you how to do that in this video. Maybe a different one. But pretty much that's it. If it doesn't boot to BIOS or just doesn't turn on, even with the shorting technique, you might have built it wrong. You're gonna want to check everything you did. Sometimes it'll be a status light. This motherboard doesn't have a status LED, but that's fine. It's turning on and running. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.